She was sent to the Alpha King as a sacrifice, but he recognized his true mate at first sight. The war between the Blackthorn Pack and the Ashwood Pack had lasted for 3 generations. Nobody alive could remember how it started. The old stories spoke of a stolen hunting ground, a broken promise, a death that was never forgiven. Whatever the cause had been, it did not matter anymore. What mattered was that the fighting had taken fathers, brothers, and sons from both sides for 60 years, and the Ashwood Pack could not survive another season of it. When the Blackthorn Alpha King sent word that he was finally willing to discuss peace, the Ashwood elders gathered in the meeting hall until the candles burned low. The terms he offered were simple and cruel. He wanted a symbol of surrender. He wanted a young woman from the Ashwood bloodline sent to his territory to remain there under his authority as proof that the pack would bow instead of fight. The elders argued for hours about whose daughter should be chosen. In the end, it was Elena who stood up and ended the argument herself. "Send me," she said. The room went quiet. Elena was the blacksmith's daughter. She had no title, no important family name, no political weight to lose. She had grown up listening to funeral bells more often than wedding bells, and she was tired of watching other families grieve while she did nothing. If her life could buy peace for people she loved, she was willing to pay that price. Her father begged her not to go. Her mother cried into her apron and would not look up from the floor. But Elena had already made her decision, and once she had decided something, she rarely changed her mind. 3 days later, she rode out of Ashwood territory with 2 guards and a single bag of belongings, her back straight and her jaw tight, refusing to let anyone see her hands shake. The journey to Blackthorn Land took a full day. The forest grew darker and older the further they traveled, the trees taller, the air heavier with the scent of another pack's territory. By the time they reached the black stone walls of the Blackthorn stronghold, the sun was already low in the sky, painting everything in shades of orange and grey. Elena had heard many stories about the Blackthorn Alpha King. Some called him ruthless, others called him cold, distant, a man who had not smiled since his mother died. He was said to rule with a kind of quiet control that frightened his own warriors more than any enemy could. She had prepared herself to meet a monster. She did not prepare herself for what actually happened. The guards led her through the front gates and into a long hall lined with stone pillars. Warriors stood at attention on either side, watching her with open curiosity. She kept her eyes forward and her chin lifted, determined not to show fear, even though her heart was pounding so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. At the far end of the hall, on a raised platform, sat the Alpha King. Elena had barely taken 3 steps into the room when he stood up so fast that his chair scraped loudly against the stone floor. The sound echoed through the silent hall. Every warrior in the room turned to look at him, confusion spreading across their faces, because their king never moved like that. He never showed anything on his face at all. But now his eyes were locked on Elena, wide and intense, and something in his expression had changed completely. It was as if the air itself had shifted the moment she walked in. Elena stopped walking. She did not understand what was happening, only that the king was staring at her the way a starving man might stare at food, except there was no cruelty in it. There was something closer to wonder, closer to disbelief. He came down from the platform slowly, step by step, his warriors watching him in stunned silence. When he reached her, he did not grab her arm or order the guards to take her away, as she had expected. Instead, he stopped a respectful distance from her and simply looked at her face as though he were trying to memorize it. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried through the whole hall. "Elena," she said, forcing her voice to stay steady, "of the Ashwood Pack. I was sent here as agreed. The sacrifice for peace." Something flickered across his face at the word sacrifice, something that looked almost like pain. "You are not a sacrifice," he said. "You are my mate." The words landed in the silent hall like a stone dropped into still water. Elena felt her whole body go cold, then hot, then confused all over again. She knew what the mate bond meant among wolf packs, even though she herself had never experienced it. It was said to be instant and undeniable, a recognition between souls that no wolf could fake and no wolf could resist. It was rare, it was sacred, and it was the last thing she had expected to hear from the man she believed would be her captor. "That is not possible," she said, before she could stop herself. "I was sent here to pay a debt, not to be claimed as anyone's mate." "I understand this is a shock," he said gently, "but I have waited a very long time to feel what I am feeling right now. I will not pretend otherwise, not even to keep the peace with careful words." His name, she would soon learn, was Damien Ashcroft, and he had ruled the Blackthorn Pack alone since his father died, carrying the weight of every decision, every battle, every loss, without anyone at his side to share the burden. He had told himself long ago that he would probably never find his true mate, that fate had perhaps forgotten him the way it seemed to forget so many others. He had made peace with that idea, or thought he had, until the moment Elena walked through his doors. That night, Damien called an emergency meeting with his advisors. Elena was given a room to rest in, though rest was the last thing on her mind. She sat by the window, staring out over unfamiliar land, trying to make sense of everything that had happened since sunrise. She had left home prepared to give up her freedom, maybe her life. She had not prepared for this. The next morning, Damien requested to speak with her privately. He came to her not as a king summoning a prisoner, but almost nervously, like a man unsure of his welcome. "I know this is strange for you," he said, standing near the door, as if giving her space. "You came here believing you would be treated as property, or worse. I want you to know that will not happen. Whatever we build between us, if we build anything at all, will be your choice." Elena studied him carefully. She had expected arrogance from a man with his reputation, but instead she found someone speaking with unusual honesty. "Why does it matter to you what I choose?" she asked. "You could take whatever you wanted." "Nobody here would stop you, because I refuse to be the kind of man who forces the person meant for him," he said simply. "My father ruled through fear. I watched what that cost him in the end. I do not want that life, and I certainly do not want it with you." Slowly, over the days that followed, Elena began to see the Blackthorn Pack differently than she expected. The warriors, though rough around the edges, were fiercely loyal to their king, and it became clear they respected him not out of fear, but out of genuine admiration. She watched him settle disputes with patience instead of anger. She watched him kneel beside an injured pup and speak softly until the child stopped crying. He was nothing like the cold, ruthless figure the stories had painted. Still, she resisted the pull she felt growing between them. She had come here to save her people, not to fall for the very man whose pack had caused so much suffering. She told herself the connection she felt was only the mate bond, working on her instincts, nothing more, something she could ignore if she tried hard enough. But ignoring it became harder with each passing week. Damien never pushed her. He answered her questions honestly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. He told her about the losses his pack had suffered in the war, losses that mirrored her own. He admitted that both sides carried guilt for things that happened generations before either of them were born. Slowly, Elena began to understand that the war had never really been about who was right. It had simply become a habit neither side knew how to break. One evening, Elena found Damien alone on the training grounds, practicing forms with his sword, long after his warriors had gone to rest. She watched him for a while before he noticed her. "You work harder than any king I have ever heard of," she said. He lowered his sword, breathing heavily. "I have to be strong enough to protect what I care about. That has always mattered more to me than titles." "And what do you care about?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment. The answer was written plainly across his face, even before he spoke it. "You already know the answer to that." Elena felt her resistance weaken further. Somewhere along the way, without meaning to, she had begun to care for him too. She admired his patience, his honesty, the gentle strength that guided every decision he made. She no longer saw a stranger from an enemy pack. She saw a man who had spent his whole life carrying too much alone, and who had somehow made room in that burden for her. "I did not come here to fall for you," she admitted quietly. "I know," he said. "I did not expect to fall for anyone either, but here we are." The following month, Damien called together the leaders of both packs. He stood before them, Elena at his side, and announced that the old debt between Blackthorn and Ashwood was cancelled. There would be no more sacrifices, no more prisoners exchanged as payment for old grudges. Instead, he proposed a real peace, sealed not through fear or forced surrender, but through the bond that had formed between their two people. Some of the older members of both packs resisted the idea at first. Old wounds do not heal overnight, and many still carried grief for those lost in the war. But Elena stood and spoke to them herself, telling them what she had seen in her weeks at Blackthorn, how the warriors there mourned the same losses her own pack mourned, how the king who once frightened her had shown her nothing but patience and respect. People began to see that continuing the war served no one, and that peace, real peace, was finally within reach. On the day the treaty was signed, banners from both packs were raised side by side over the Blackthorn stronghold for the first time in 60 years. Warriors who had once been enemies stood shoulder to shoulder, watching their leaders shake hands in front of everyone. That night, Damien and Elena stood together on the balcony, overlooking both territories, the fires of celebration glowing far below them. "You came here believing you were giving away your life," Damien said quietly, taking her hand in his. "I did," she admitted. "I thought I was saying goodbye to everything I knew." "And instead?" he asked. She smiled, something she had not expected to do so freely, in a place that once felt so frightening. "Instead, I think I was only just beginning." Below them, both packs howled together under the same moon, the sound rising into the night sky, no longer a cry of war, but a celebration of something new. For the first time in 3 generations, Blackthorn and Ashwood were no longer enemies bound by hatred. They were one people, bound by peace, and by a love that neither Elena nor Damien had ever expected to find, but that both now knew they would never let go.